This video is sponsored by the Wargames Research Group. I'm trying to build a complete compendium to teach new players how to play DBMM, so please like the video, comment and subscribe so this series gets shown to more people. Today we're going to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the three types of commanders you can have in a DBMM army: regular commanders, irregular commanders and allied commanders, as well as explain how pip dice are rolled for. Commanders all do the same thing. They are essential for moving troops on the field. They're all represented by an otherwise normal element in the army list that fights always at a +1 combat factor, and when eliminating enemies provides a +1 factor to neighbouring friendly elements. But there are three flavours of commander, and that affects how pips are distributed amongst other things. Those are regular, irregular and allied. These types of generals also differ in cost. To arrive at the cost of your general's element, you first take the base cost of whatever the element type is. So here in the Alexandrian army, that would be a regular fast knight in wedge, costing 11 points. Regular sub-generals or a regular commander-in-chief then add an additional 20 points to their cost. This means our regular fast knight in wedge commanders cost a whopping 31 points each when regular. Irregular sub-commanders or the commander-in-chief add 10 points to their cost. Allied generals add 10 points if regular, or just 5 points if irregular. You roll 1 pip die for every commander you have, but the way in which those dice are allocated depends on the type of general. Importantly, if you have less than 4 commanders, always roll an extra dice which is discarded on a 6. This dummy dice keeps your opponent guessing as to whether you're using a stratagem like an ambush or a flank march, or if you really just have 3 larger commands. So how do these options differ and which one should you choose? Well, before discussing the differences in the individual elements and the pip allocation, the first and often underestimated thing to note, if you're looking for the advantages of having the all-regular army with its regular troops, which are far more controllable and has the excellent regular baggage options, then these troops usually come in armies where all the commanders are also regular. So even if you didn't value the benefits of regular commanders over irregular ones for the cost, it could be considered a tax that might be worth having in order to have access to regular troops. This is to say it's important to always think of these units like every other in the context of a whole army, not just as individual elements or the individual rules that they bring to the table. Starting with regular generals, they have a number of benefits for the 20 points they cost. Firstly, they get effectively a free pip for moving in or halting a group with all regular troops, and check back on my previous video for more information on this. This is really powerful when combined with the easier control regular troops afford. Secondly, when you have multiple regular generals in the army, such as this Alexandrian Macedonian army, before the battle you allocate pip dice to various commands in order of score. For example, here I can choose to give the highest dice roll to always go to the knights, and the lowest will always go to the pike block, as I expect that I'll be doing more fine manoeuvring with the knights than the pikes, so I always want them to have the highest pip dice. You can also choose to average the sets of dice out. I might want to average the 2 highest dice rolls and give them to 2 different mounted commands, and take the 2 lowest dice rolls and give it to the 2 infantry commands. Note when rounding you always round down regardless of the total, but this ability can stop a unit from being hampered by a disastrous 1 on the pip allocation dice, either by ensuring you're giving it to a unit that's mostly going to be remaining stationary or is easy to manoeuvre, or by averaging it with a higher dice roll to even out the randomness. This ability to avoid disastrous outcomes on the dice at a critical moment can make armies with regular commanders much more forgiving, particularly for newer players, and that's why I always recommend that new players, if they're unsure what sort of force they want to collect a regular army. Next we have irregular commanders. Here there's no ability to mitigate the dice rolls, and every commander rolls a separate, usually different coloured dice throughout the game and always receives that particular score. That means your key cavalry command can at the most inopportune moment roll a 1 and stall on a key attack. It also means that they have a greater risk of losing control over impetuous troops. They are, however, half the price of regular commanders. That means that regular armies often choose to only have 3 commands, as they can manage their pip dice more easily, whereas an irregular army is more easily able to buy a 4th commander, increasing the total number of pip dice rolled, and thus having more overall pips to spend each turn, but less ability to determine where they go. Having these 4 commanders also allows you to use stratagems like flank marches or ambushes a bit more convincingly, because if you show up with only 2 commands on the board, then your opponent is likely going to know something is up, while 3 looks a little bit more normal. And the other option would of course be to simply just have more troops and save on the cost of the 4th general. The final option is an allied commander. An ally rolls a separate pip dice just like an irregular commander, even if that ally is regular, although it still gets its bonus for manoeuvring its own troops. However, if the first pip dice of the game rolled is a 1, then that ally is unreliable. If an ally is unreliable, then their units cannot shoot and cannot move closer to any known enemy less than 800 paces away. If any commander on the player's side are broken in the previous bound, and no enemy's commander is broken, then they have a risk of switching sides. If they are irregular and of a different nation, then they switch sides, or if they're from the same nation but existed at the same period and their army list specifies them as possible enemies, they'll also switch sides. Otherwise, their command just immediately becomes disheartened. An unreliable ally will become reliable again if an enemy moves within 240 paces of any unhidden elements from that command, or shoots at the unreliable ally, or if 4 more enemy elements were lost or broken than friendly elements. Alternatively, a commander-in-chief can expend 3 pips to try to activate the ally, and then if on the following turn the ally's dice rolls a 5 or a 6, it becomes reliable again. This makes allies a big risk, particularly if they're a sizable portion of your army, as once an ally becomes unreliable, it can be very difficult to get them moving again and can ruin an entire battle plan. However, ally generals do have their advantages, particularly given how cheap they are, and most importantly because they often allow you to choose from other army lists, which may be able to fill out a major deficiency that your chosen army's base list has without them. The final consideration is that if an allied general doesn't arrive on the 8th bound of a flank march, it never chooses to arrive, and therefore allied generals are usually the worst forces to try to send on a flank march. It's generally considered a bit risky to take more than one allied general. However, beyond this, there remains a lively debate within the DBMM community as to whether regular or irregular generals are better, and tournaments have been topped with both regular and irregular armies, as well as armies using and not using allies, which shows that these options are quite well balanced between each other. The final 2 options are Inert and Brilliant Generals. Inert Generals give an additional 75 points to a list if it's your Commander-in-Chief, or 25 points if it's an ally. The value of an Inert General's command must be overall positive, even with the minus 75 point discount, to stop a player from simply choosing an Inert General and only assigning a token force to that commander. If only one player has an Inert Commander-in-Chief, their opponent always gets the first turn, regardless of who deployed first. An Inert General also always deducts 1 pip from their own command score, and if it is the Commander-in-Chief, from every pip score from all the commands that have arrived on the battlefield, even if the Commander-in-Chief is lost or otherwise not present. Inert Generals are very good in a number of circumstances, but I think are best in regular armies. In regular armies, you have the ability to allocate pip dice that can mitigate the general reduction in points somewhat, and the extra 75 points you're getting in a game could allow you to buy an extra sub-commander you may not have had to use otherwise. Over 4 commands, you'll lose 4 pips from an inert commander, but adding a 4th general you otherwise didn't have would on average add 3.5 pips, which helps even out much of the effect. Of course, that would cost around 30 of the 75 bonus points, but it would still leave you with roughly 45 left to play with. It isn't a perfect conversion, however, and because of the advantages of large commands on morale and group moving, breaking up units over multiple commands can have their advantages and disadvantages. Inert commanders can, however, be strong in regular lists with very expensive troops, such as Roman armies, where those extra points can allow the army to field enough frontage to avoid being outflanked. With irregular generals, the inert choice can be more punishing, as you can't redistribute the pip dice, so it's not a simple conversion as previous. Plus, often you are at your maximum number of sub-commanders anyway in a non-inert irregular list, so the 75 points can only be spent on more troops, who will in turn be even more unwieldy. When I see inert general plays, it's nearly always in regular armies. They're a powerful option worth considering, particularly once a player is more experienced, but also not an auto-include option that's just too good to pass up. There are many disadvantages of having an inert commander as well. Finally, there are brilliant generals. These generals cost an extra 25 points, whether they're allies, sub-commanders or the commander-in-chief, and a brilliant general gets 2 brilliant strokes per game. These can be used to double their command's pip dice, or if it's a regular commander-in-chief, their subordinates as well. Alternatively, it can be used to add a +1 combat factor to themselves and adjacent bases for a turn, exchange pip dice for no cost if regular, or speed up a flank march. Brilliant commanders also have access to an expanded pool of stratagems that they can spend their brilliant strokes on as well. Brilliant commanders cannot take advantage of the low dice in regular armies, but given the central role in an army's battle plan, I can't see why a player would choose to do so. Brilliant commanders can be effective, but they really require a player to have a definite plan for what they intend to do with them. To justify spending 25 points, which could otherwise be a good chunk of troops, you'd want to do something decisive with that commander, whether it's using the ability to double pip dice to launch a wide flanking movement to outposition the enemy before launching some devastating charge, or using one of the unique stratagems. If you're committing to spending 25 points on a brilliant commander, it then becomes your burden to make sure something happens with that command to make the expense worthwhile. You must make a decisive move with them rather than trying to play a reactionary game. I think the Brilliant Commander upgrade is at its best when the element is already a high combat factor and has access to quick kills. For example, a brilliant Knight General like Alexander flanked by more Knights, using their brilliant stroke is going to be fighting mounted on 5 and all other elements on 6 and will often quick kill them. Using that advantage to punch a wide hole through a line after outmaneuvering an enemy with its bonus pips is an effective example of using a brilliant commander, effectively delivering the ability to cause an opponent's command and thus their entire flank to crumble by delivering a devastating general's charge. This is going to be less possible with commanders' elements that lack the ability to quick kill units or have low factors, as making the first gap is going to be much less likely even with an additional +1. Because of the decisive nature that using a brilliant commander requires, it's often a better option for experienced players rather than new players, as they'll be able to get the most out of the tactical decision making it allows. Plus 25 points is a lot, but it's important not only to think about the point for point comparison of the bases a brilliant general would need to kill to get their points back, and think more about how breaking a hole in a line can cause a major issue to an enemy's battle plan, weakening other parts of it or causing units to be diverted to plug the gap. So those are the types of generals and how pip generation works. Regular generals have their pips allocated to commands based on a high, medium, low distribution, or even average to provide maximum flexibility and control. Irregular commanders roll their own dice and cannot mitigate pip changes. Allied commanders do the same, but on a 1 they become unreliable. Inert commanders reduce an army's pips and always give your opponent the first turn, but give additional points to spend on units, whereas brilliant commanders cost extra, but come with a host of tactical options to enable a player to pull out a game-winning strategy. The commander types are well balanced against each other, and there isn't a definitive answer on the best type of commander in an army, which shows the depth of balance in the DBMM rule system. However, if you're a new player, but unsure of what to collect, try a regular army first, as it can be more forgiving on new players getting to grips with the command and control system. If you found this overview interesting, please like, comment and subscribe so this video gets shown to more people.